for joining us this afternoon for this session on special schools eye care with Lisa Donaldson, Head of Eye Care and Vision at SeeAbility. If you want to ask any questions during the session, just pop them into the chat and Lisa can answer them at the end of the session. So yeah, over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Annabelle. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, brilliant. So yeah, I'm going to tell you a little bit about eye care for children who attend special schools and why it's so important. And a little bit of history about that. I've worked at SeeAbility for over a decade and we've been trying to get eye care in all special schools, and I'll tell you a bit more about the research and the work that we've done and also the services that we provide in schools. So I was just going to start with a question. Annabelle, you might need to help me out here to see if anyone can answer this question in the chat, or you're welcome to turn your mic off and have a guess. So just want to see what everybody would guess, and that doesn't matter if you get it wrong, but what do you think is the leading cause of avoidable low vision? And when I say low vision, I mean a level of vision that would make you eligible as registrable as sight impaired or severely sight impaired. So does anyone want to give me a guess? No one's going to go on. Try something. Annabelle, you're going to have to.
Absolutely no idea.
Yeah, same, no idea.
I was thinking, I don't
They
know.
spend less time in front of screens, but I do that every day and it's not enough.
Now, I mean, most people say glaucoma or cataracts, or but it's actually not having the glasses that you need.
Oh, right.
So that's why, we hear a lot of charities like Vision Aid Overseas and Clearly who provide glasses to people in countries without a developed NHS. But the shocking fact is that for our special schools population, that's still the case. So they're still missing out on vision for want of glasses. So I was going to start by telling you about a young man, Nathaniel, who I met. It's about 5 years ago now, when we first went into his school in North London. Nathaniel is registered as profoundly deaf, and at the age of 14 he was in a challenging behaviour class, and when I we sent out a history form to ask parents about how the whether they'd had eye care before. It was all part of our research project and providing a service at the same time to check their eyes. Mum said he had no useful means of communication and I wouldn't be able to test Nathaniel on the form. That's what she'd written. And it wasn't easy, and he wouldn't come to the testing room. He was very anxious, pushing me away, but I was able to just shine a light in his eyes and measure his eyes, and from that, in his classroom, I was able to get the idea that he was very, very short-sighted, and we had to get him a pair of glasses that's -16. And I don't know if anybody here on the call is short-sighted, but what that means is the furthest he could see from his face was the inverse of that. So that's about 2 or 3 centimetres from his face, and beyond that, everything is increasingly blurry. So he's severely sight impaired up to the age of 14. And then we gave him some glasses and we kept a regular check on his eyes, and we made sure that the glasses were repaired when they needed to be. And I'm very happy to say that now Nathaniel has learnt BSL. So he first learnt Makaton and then he learnt BSL. He's now at college and he has perfect vision, and he actually now goes to the optician and can sign the bottom line on a letter chart. So he was really misdiagnosed largely with behaviours that challenge because he was so challenged by the fact that he couldn't see. So yeah, it can be really life-changing to get a pair of glasses, and it's something that those of us who can easily verbalize my vision's bad, or all children get screening in mainstream school, but that screening doesn't happen in special schools because it doesn't work, because all children would, well, that was part of our study. All the school entry age children, of 300 of them, only one of them passed screening, so it's not generally done in special schools. Really shocking that when they're at so much more risk, they actually get less. So another example is Brandon. So I mentioned screening. One of the most important things vision screening is picking up is lazy eyes. we didn't meet Brandon until he was 16, and for him there was nothing we could do about his lazy eye other than let everybody know so that adaptions could be put in place, that he really had very little vision in his right eye. But that eye could have developed if he'd been able to get glasses and wear a patch to stimulate his weak eye, which is, sure you've all seen young children who have patching therapy, but because it was picked up so late, it was too late for Brendan. And yeah, another example here with my colleague Kieran is a young man called James, again non-verbal and very long-sighted. And James has a diagnosis of sensory issues, possibly ADHD, and he was totally disengaged with any attempts at schoolwork, classwork. But once he got his glasses, his teacher now says he is much more engaged in activities. But Mum, who's there now in the picture, she just said she did not know how to get an eye test for him. She'd tried and she'd failed in the high street. It's really challenging for families to access, firstly to realise that something's wrong when the children have got so many health things going on, and then secondly to be able to access an eye test in the community. They normally end up, if they can't be tested in an optician's, they'll get referred, and that can take a year, 2 years. Ophthalmology is now the longest waiting list. So and then the other case study I was going to tell you about is Scott here, who works with me at SeeAbility. Scott is an absolute legend, and he's been part of the eye care work for a really long time, and he was awarded the British Empire Medal a few years ago now. And he was a lucky one, really, that his eye condition was picked up, and he did have a very serious eye condition called keratoconus, which leads to blindness if it's not treated. And keratoconus is 20 times more common in Down syndrome than in the general population, and also in Williams syndrome, which is a rarer syndrome that Scott has. So again, when we went into another school at Priory School in South London, we picked up an 18-year-old with advanced keratoconus, because we started in that school when he was already 18. He hadn't had an eye test before, and he'd actually lost most of his sight. And unfortunately, he can't have a less invasive treatment because he was picked up too late. So now he's going to need corneal grafts, which is a corneal transplant, which is a very major surgery. So I was going to just tell you a little bit about the research evidence for what's going on with eye care and people with learning disabilities. So research that we've done and many others have done as well shows that children are 28 times more likely to have a problem with their eyes than other children. And amazingly, it's the most common physical comorbidity of learning disability. And a new evidence reviewer, a Cochrane review of comorbidities in learning disability that was just released, shows that typically someone with a learning disability will have 11 other health issues. And yeah, vision problems top that list. And the more severe your learning disability, the more likely you are to have a visual impairment. And there's recommendations in that review paper that I was mentioning that everybody with a severe learning disability should assume to be visually impaired until it's been proven otherwise. So in other words, they absolutely need to get routine investigations to keep a check on things. So pre-2016, we had guidelines from the eye care professions that children should be getting targeted vision assessment, but we knew it wasn't really happening. And in 2016, all of the eye care bodies, there's lots of them, but the eye doctors and optometrists and dispensing opticians and orthoptists all came together to agree that all children should get an eye test at least annually. And critically, part of those recommendations were that they should also be offered glasses in school as well and support to wear them. And that's a real missing link that we're really passionate about because it makes such a big difference. Another piece of research a few years ago now, sort of 2016, I think it was published. It was looking at the children in an eye clinic, in a special school, and an eye clinic doctor went in and tested them all. 6 months later, of the 200 children that needed glasses, only 20% were successfully wearing them when they were only given a prescription. So that was really our inspiration to do the spectacle dispensing, to provide the glasses as part of the model in school. And then Public Health England, which is now the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, now recommend this framework model in their guidelines. That's just some of the data, some of the evidence. And yeah, all of the evidence really is that half of children who attend special schools will have a significant problem with their eyes and vision. And yet around 45% have never had their eyes looked at before. Not in the schools where there is an eye care service now, but this is, it's still 90% of English schools don't have an NHS eye care service. And only about 10% have ever been to a high street opticians or optometrists. And yet 30 to 40% of students need glasses, and often their glasses are a higher prescription and they need more support to wear them as well. And most of the children where they are getting eye care, they're getting routine eye care in hospitals. They're going back year after year, or quite often failing. There's another bit of evidence that shows that around half of the students don't get discharged because they fail to attend. They're not brought. So yeah, really strong stats there of evidence of need, and actually relatively low levels of eye disease that actually requires treatment. So there's I'll come on to some of the other conditions briefly, but mostly these things are related to something congenital. There's something the student was born with. It's not a progressive disease, so it doesn't need to be managed in hospital. It can be managed in the school setting. So NHS England listened to all of that evidence that was published and the framework for looking after children's eye, and they rolled out an eye care service in all schools, and we provide that in about 20% of schools in South East London at the moment. We're still in a state of uncertainty at the moment. All contracts have been frozen, and we don't know. I was hoping when I got to speak to you today that we would know, because from April 2024 there's going to be a new local commissioning model, so it won't be commissioned by NHS England anymore, but by the ICBs. But we're still not sure how it's going to get rolled out across the rest of the country. But there's a definite commitment to do that from the Department of Health. So there's some of the reasons why it's so important to get eye care. I just wanted to explain to you briefly how we test children's eyes, because I get the question all the time, he can't read, you won't be able to test him, or he can't sit still, or sometimes unfortunately people have been told they can't be tested. So I wanted to explain the test at the top there. That's called retinoscopy, and when you have a photograph taken, you see the red reflex from your retina. So when you get red eye, you don't really want red eye. It's not popular. You can black it out with the new phone editing software. But that red eye reflex, we wiggle a light and we look at the movement of it, and from that we can work out the shape of the eye and hold up different lenses, but actually measure whether the eye is short-sighted or long-sighted, because the reason you are short or long-sighted is actually to do with the shape of your eye. So it's a bit like measuring your feet. We can prescribe glasses just from those measurements. So people often think because you choose and read the bottom letter and is number 1 or number 2 clearer, that's just fine-tuning to that basic measurement. So we can prescribe without needing to get a response from a student. And we're not guessing, which is again what a lot of people think. So that's your long-sightedness, your short-sightedness, and your astigmatism you can measure. We can also measure whether, and this is the bit that's different to the shape of the eye, but whether the eye is able to shift focus. So all of us who are sort of over 45 are very aware that we're not as good as that as we used to be. So when I'm doing this training live, I'll say you could be able to bring something right up to the tip of your nose when you're a young child, and gradually that point is moving away because the muscles in your eye can't change the shape of the lens anymore. The lens becomes stiffer. And actually, for a lot of young people with learning disability, particularly in the case of Down syndrome, 80% of students with Down syndrome can't shift focus from far to near. And what that means practically is whether or not they need glasses for long-sightedness, short-sightedness, or astigmatism for the distance, they need a different prescription to see up close. So they either need bifocals or 2 pairs of glasses or varifocals. So they have much more complex prescriptions. But we can measure all of that just by wiggling a light in your eyes. And we can also look at the optic nerve inside the eye. We can look at the health of the eye using the ophthalmoscope, which is the picture at the bottom there. Now, obviously, for a lot of the children, it isn't just glasses. Glasses isn't going to fix their visual issues. So the other problem that's present for about 30 to 40% of our special school population is cerebral visual impairment. And that's a whole other talk and a whole book in itself. But I just wanted to touch on it because a lot of families will say, well, we went to the eye clinic and the eye doctor said his eyes are fine, but he can't see. And that's really because his eyes are fine, but the messages from the eye aren't getting through to the brain and being processed. And that's what cerebral visual impairment is. And it has effects that range, as widely as any other brain damage. Is very, if you have an adult who has a stroke and a certain part of the brain responsible for a certain part of visual processing is damaged, you can pretty much pinpoint what their issues are going to be. But in children, there's so much neuroplasticity that new pathways form. So it may be that their visual impairment is really hard to predict just from looking at a scan. So it's functional behaviours that can help you work it out. And these are just some of the things that can be affected. And we can support students with strategies to minimise clutter, to understand which side of their vision is best, so you can understand where to place things. Yeah, so that's part of what we do in a special schools eye care service, is identify and strategise for cerebral visual impairment. So I was just going to finish off to give us some time. Hopefully you've got some questions and we can cover that after, but just wanted to sort of finish off by busting a few myths. So everyone can have their eyes tested. So, if a student is unable to be tested in an optician's, then they should be, ideally we should see them in school, or if there's not a school service, they should, they unfortunately need a referral to the hospital. But absolutely everyone can be tested. You don't need to be able to sit still, read, or as long as you can have a light shone in your eyes, then we can do a useful eye test. I've touched on how we can tell what glasses are needed just by using a light, and the fact that we don't need to read or choose which is better. The other really important myth is we don't get a wow moment very often. Sometimes we do. Actually, we did with Nathaniel when he first put his glasses on, he was blown away. But a lot of students, when they first get a new pair of glasses, the sensory issue is so overwhelming that very often they will reject them. And that can mean they end up getting put in a drawer, or family and supporters think, well, actually, maybe they weren't right. Maybe he doesn't need them. They didn't look like there was much in the test anyway. So very often it is a case of really working with a student to get used to having something on their face, to get used to seeing things so differently, because it is often a very high prescription and it feels very, very different. If any of you wear glasses, you may know when you first get a really slight tweak change in prescription, things can look very slopey and feel quite weird, and you can be a bit off balance. That can be really overwhelming. And we've done some work with occupational therapists, and what we were taught when we were being trained to check people's eyes and to prescribe glasses is, when they're first getting used to them, sit still, don't move. And that was mainly because you don't want somebody to fall over because their processing's challenged. But actually, if you're stimulating the vestibular system, so if you're moving, if you can walk, or if you're a wheelchair user, if you're moving, if you're if you're swimming, even if you're, if you're doing something active, you'll get used to that change in the way you're visualizing the world, and you'll learn to process it quicker. But it really is, we do have to provide quite a lot of support to get used to glasses. There was one thing I wanted to mention for CENMAC, which I'm sorry I haven't got on the slides, I think, so I will stop sharing. But I did also just want to touch on eye gaze, and communication tech, which I thought I'd put a slide in for and I haven't, apologies. Just because for eye tests for this population of students, we have come across students before who've had assessments with speech and language to use communication technology and actually have been deemed cognitively unable to access it, or it hasn't been successful. And then when we've looked at their eyes, it's because they can't see the screen. And they need a specific pair of glasses for that screen distance, or they need glasses and they haven't had them before. We've also on occasion seen students who perhaps don't have very much useful vision, and they have profound cerebral visual impairment and they don't have some basic visual reflexes, and that's not been understood, and people have been putting a lot of resource into trying to teach those students how to use eye gaze communication tech. So really, really important when you're thinking about accessing that technology. You know, we can, part of a standard vision test will be to say how well a student is able to track and whether they're able to make accurate saccadic eye movements, which is where you move your eyes from one target to another, but also whether they're focused and whether they need, as I say, whether they need glasses, or if they have nystagmus, which is uncontrollable eye movements. So any kind of visual communicate, any eye tracking software, really, really important to think about what the student can see and what their visual abilities are. So I will end on that note and see if, have a look in the chat and see if we do have any questions, or otherwise put your...
I think there were a couple of comments, but I don't think there's been any questions so far. Mary just said that's very short-sighted to something that you said earlier in the
Nathaniel, he's very short-sighted, but that's not that uncommon. It's very common to be, when you're very premature, you're quite often very myopic, very short-sighted as well.
It looks like Nitin has
Nitin's got a few questions.
Let me just see if I can unmute.
Sorry, can I actually talk or should I type?
There we go. I'm just going to mute myself for a sec.
I think you can talk now, Nitin, if Annabelle's muted, maybe. Oh, no, can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Can hear you, Annabelle. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can hear you,
I'm
Nitin.
CPI, working for London Borough of Brent, and I have come across some of your colleagues in special schools. Sonal being one of them.
Okay.
One of the things I've found is how the reports, when you go into schools, how easy are your reports to be disseminated by teachers who are not VI trained, and how that, you know, the advice that you give is actioned.
It's a real challenge, and we've worked really hard on it. We really didn't, you know, what we've found, some students, for example, when they have a hemianopia, when they've got cerebral visual impairment, that means they can't see on one side, often they've just got a letter that says, you know, it has been diagnosed, and there's a hospital letter somewhere in their file that says they've got a total left hemianopia, but it means nothing. So we do try really hard to put it into plain English. We also try to put a front sheet on our report that says vision information should be included in the EHCP, and a summary of what the child's visual needs are. But we'd always welcome kind of feedback or discussion on how we can make that better. And we're really aware that it is really, because you've got so many other things going on, that, you know, we would need to keep it as top line as possible. And actually, sometimes it is quite a complex and multifaceted scenario. So, yeah.
It is. And I think it's really important. Do you have any advice, teachers within SeeAbility, that kind of gives you that kind of QTVI, specialist VI teacher role? Because often what I'm seeing is that these reports are left with the nurse in the school, who doesn't know the kids and how the classroom, in terms of how they're educated, how that will imply in the classroom. And as you know, teachers are very busy, changes of teachers, and I often find that some of the reports just don't get read, and it's really important that that's kind of, you know, you're doing a great job. It's a wonderful thing that you're doing, but in terms of the effectiveness of how it's disseminated and actioned,
how
there have
would
been
your
some
advice
students
be
that
have you got any suggestions for how?
I think every school should have a dedicated teacher who has the time in their timetable to actually go through the reports and kind of unpick it, and also liaise with the local QTVI service if they need any support with understanding that, because there are lots of things in it which are useful, but sometimes teachers don't understand. They may not, they just need someone to unpick it for them, and it's really important that happens. This is just a little snapshot. Obviously you've got a greater number of schools and you've got lots of positive outcomes from it, but the little snapshots I've had is there needs to be a complete oversight by somebody in the school to make sure the advice is being followed up. And one or two couple of experiences I've had is it's not happening, and I really would like that.
Can I ask which school that was in, or you can tell me after? I can
tell you after. I've got your email. I know Sonal, and it'd be good for you to talk to Sonal as well.
Sonal about it. Yeah, I will do.
But,
I mean, I have to say we do
well,
ask that of the schools, and we do. One of the things we do as well is, some of what I've just presented now I've cribbed from a teach training session that we kind of keep saying to the schools, please can we come in on an inset day and just do a half hour, an hour on vision, just to get the class, and it's really depressing sometimes when we do that training and say, who's seen these reports, because we all come home and spend hours writing them like everybody, and then to hear that they're not getting out there, and that we do hear that, and we do continually with every school keep trying to say how, because at the end of the day, we can only take it as far as writing the report and sending it to the school, and then it does become, to some extent, I think it's a really good idea to have a main point of contact who takes responsibility. And I have to say, the schools where it works best, we do have that set up better. So I'd like to know where that is so that we can look into that particular school. But
it is a wonderful service you offer, but for its, and I think part of your contract with every school is to have somebody who can take that on board, but with the protected time. It will just sit and gather dust or on a hard drive, and the valuable work that you're doing, it could be even more effective if you had somebody unpicking what you're doing and has that link with you, because schools are busy, really busy, and I'm finding that certain teachers have less and less time to kind of do the specialist role, and it's so important that when you talk to the head teacher, not the nurse, not anyone else, it has to be the head teacher who has that decision to release however much time a teacher needs to actually work through those reports and train teachers. So that would be great, if that could be.
The other thing we do try to do as well, just for anyone else who's listening, and for yourself, we do always try, if a student does have a visual impairment then that's not treatable, then we will always copy in the QTVI who's responsible for that school. So that's, I mean, obviously that's how I presume that's how you've made contact with Sonal. But again, that can be really challenging because their caseloads are so huge, and when they're
it's huge. But I probably will talk to you later about the particular cases.
Brilliant.
But also with the testing that you do, in terms of using picture communication and symbols that you might use, is to have them in the schools early. So when you do the testing with the kids, so if you're using K pictures, for example, that the students prior to you coming in have learnt whichever way they communicate those symbols or are familiar. I don't know what you use
so we've got
testing,
the CENC app we tell all the schools about, to try and get them. It's like an app that goes with the K's pictures on an iPad, so that you can learn the sounds and the photograph with the picture of this symbol. And we have the Peekaboo Vision app, which again is free to download, and so we talk to classes about practicing that in school, and we often write that on our reports as well to get parents to practice those things too. So and some of the schools they do social stories about the eye test, and so different schools have supported in different ways as well, and it's and different clinicians too. So but I agree, it's about getting them used to what's going to happen, and that's the great thing about a model that the NHS is commissioning at the moment, where you have continuity of care, where the same clinicians are coming back in. You don't have to just see a child once. When I was in the hospital, they'd get their 1 6-month appointment, and if they were having a bad day, you didn't get anything done, and then they didn't get another chance for another 6 months. So we can do a little bit, and if that day's not working, you swap them with another student and have another go the next week.
Thank you, Lisa. I am just looking at the time. We have amazingly gone through that half an hour extremely quickly. I'll just ask if anybody else has another question, or we might leave it there. And if you do have a question, and I can always put you in touch with Lisa. But yes, that was really interesting. Actually, I thought it was interesting what you said about 20 times more common in children with Down syndrome, and being World Down Syndrome Day today. So that I was thinking, that's interesting.
Yes, that's keratoconus is 20 times more common. And 80% of children with Down syndrome have poor accommodation, so need additional glasses for reading, a different prescription. And at least 90% of people with Down syndrome do need glasses, and again, quite often stronger prescriptions and strange prescriptions that aren't typical. So yeah, Down syndrome children do more often tend to get they're not the ones that we discover because most pediatricians know Down syndrome eyes. So touch wood, the vast majority of children with Downs do get picked up and are quite well managed actually. But the keratoconus is a rotten one that they get saddled with, really, which is a really challenging thing, as my colleague Scott that I was telling you about. But yes, it is World Down Syndrome Day, so yeah, they're give them a definitely.
It's, something that like, oh yes, okay, that
yeah.
But yes, it's it just sounds like a kind of a huge issue, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to bring this to an end, and yes, if anyone does have a question for Lisa, feel free to send it on to me and I will forward it to Lisa, and I'll put this recording up on our recordings page soon too. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you all for joining. Thank you for inviting me, Annabelle.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.